caught yourself boasting a little too much about your accomplishments as you age? What if I told you there are certain things, no matter how proud you are, that you should never brag about in your golden years? It's tempting to share your successes, but sometimes it's the most humble among us who build the deepest connections and lead the richest lives. In today's video, we'll explore 9 taboo things you should avoid bragging about as you grow older. From health to family, money, and even work, we'll hear stories from wise elders, like Mrs. Jenkins, 75, who learned the hard way about the power of humility, and Mr. Thompson, 82, whose health boasts led him to rethink the value of compassion. Let's dive into these personal stories and the lessons they've learned, so you can navigate aging with wisdom, grace, and the respect of those around you. Here's your refined version. 1. Boasting about financial success. Meet Mrs. Jenkins, a lively 75-year-old widow who has lived a full life, one filled with hard work and smart investments. After years of financial discipline, she found herself in a comfortable position, able to live without worry and enjoy the finer things in life. One day, at her local community center, she began sharing with her friends how her real estate investments had skyrocketed, and how she had managed to save up more than enough to live out her days in luxury. Her story was full of pride, and she was eager to share it. But as Mrs. Jenkins spoke, something strange happened. Her friends, who had always gathered around her, slowly started pulling back. Invitations to coffee chats grew less frequent, and casual phone calls stopped coming. Mrs. Jenkins noticed the change but brushed it off. After all, she thought, who wouldn't be proud of such a success? It wasn't until a close friend, Betty, gently explained that her boasting made others feel uncomfortable and, at times, inadequate, that Mrs. Jenkins began to understand the impact of her words. The truth is, financial success, while a great accomplishment, can often be perceived as a source of division in old age. What matters most is the connections we maintain with those around us. When we boast too much about how well we're doing financially, it can create a barrier between us and others who may be struggling, or who simply don't relate. It's easy to forget that while we might be proud of our achievements, the people around us might not be in the same financial situation, and hearing about it constantly can cause discomfort or even resentment. Humility around financial success is key to fostering genuine relationships. Mrs. Jenkins learned this the hard way. Once she toned down the talk about her wealth and instead focused on listening to her friends, offering them emotional support, and celebrating the things that truly mattered, like health, family, and shared memories. She found that her friendships deepened. It was her humility, not her money, that created lasting bonds. In old age, it's the people in our lives who truly make us rich, not the numbers in our bank account. The lesson is clear. While financial success is something to be proud of, it's also important to approach it with sensitivity. True wealth is found in the trust and connection we nurture with others. As we age, the best thing we can share is not our wealth, but our wisdom, kindness, and the humility to recognize that money isn't everything. 2. Boasting about your health at the expense of others. Mr. Thompson, 82, is a man full of energy, always eager to share his stories with anyone who will listen. He's proud of his health. His blood pressure is perfect. He walks every day without any aches or pains, and he constantly reminds people that he feels better than most 60-year-olds. He often uses his physical vitality as a point of pride, boasting about how he can still bend down, climb stairs, and jog around the block with ease. But one day, during a casual conversation with his longtime friend Betty, who struggles with arthritis, Mr. Thompson made a comment that would change their friendship forever. As Betty described the pain in her joints and how difficult it was to move some days, Mr. Thompson, without thinking, interrupted her with a chuckle. "Well, I guess I'm just lucky," he said. "I can't even remember the last time I had a stiff joint or a bad knee." "You really should try walking more, Betty." "Like I do, I'm almost as spry as I was when I was 60. Betty's smile quickly faded, and she awkwardly changed the subject. But Mr. Thompson didn't realize the sting his words had caused until much later. What Mr. Thompson didn't understand at the time was that his health wasn't just a personal achievement, it was a sensitive subject for Betty. For her, every movement was a reminder of her physical limitations. What might seem like a harmless boast to one person can feel like an insensitive comparison to another. especially when they are dealing with chronic health issues that make even simple tasks feel like mountains to climb. By comparing his perfect knees to Betty's arthritis struggles, Mr. Thompson unintentionally made Betty feel small, as if her pain was somehow less valid because he didn't experience the same challenges. The lesson here is clear. Health, while something to be grateful for, is also something that should be approached with empathy. Old age often brings with it various health challenges, and not everyone is fortunate enough to enjoy the same physical abilities. Rather than bragging about perfect health, it's important to offer support and encouragement to those who may be struggling. Instead of making comparisons, we should listen and show understanding. By sharing our health journeys without overshadowing others' struggles, we foster an environment of kindness and support where everyone feels valued and heard. Mr. Thompson learned his lesson when Betty later confided in him how his words had hurt her. He was deeply regretful and realized that boasting about his health at the expense of others only created distance. From then on, he focused on offering Betty words of encouragement, sharing his experiences without making comparisons, and letting her know that he understood her struggles. In the end, he realized that true strength lies not in how well we're doing, but in how we lift up others in their moments of need. 3. Celebrating your perfect family dynamics. Miss Elsie had always prided herself on having what she called a perfect family. She would often boast about how close-knit her children and grandchildren were, how they always got together for Sunday dinners, and how there was never any drama. To Miss Elsie, her family's unity was one of her greatest achievements, and she took every opportunity to share this with her friends. Whenever the topic of family came up in conversation, Miss Elsie would beam with pride, telling anyone who would listen how her family was the model of harmony, with no disagreements or tensions ever in sight. But one day, Miss Elsie's world was turned upside down when her sister Violet stopped visiting her. At first, Elsie thought Violet might just be busy or under the weather, but the weeks went by. Elsie began to wonder if something was wrong. She called her sister several times, but Violet's phone calls were brief, and the warmth that had once existed between them was gone. Eventually, Elsie confronted her sister, asking what was going on. That's when Violet revealed that she hadn't spoken to Elsie in over a year because of the constant boasting about their perfect family. Violet, who had been struggling with her own family's issues ranging from her son's financial troubles to her daughter's difficult divorce, felt that Elsie's bragging only highlighted her own family struggles. While Elsie never intended to hurt Violet, her constant talk of a flawless family dynamic made Violet feel like her own difficulties were inadequate or less important in her eyes. Elsie's bragging was a reminder that her own family wasn't perfect, and the contrast between the two families only deepened the rift. It was a painful realization for Miss Elsie, who had always thought of her family as the epitome of success. The lesson here is that every family, no matter how well-functioning it may appear on the surface, has its own set of challenges. In old age, when relationships with family can often take center stage, it's important to recognize that bragging about family dynamics can make others feel isolated or ashamed. While it's natural to be proud of your loved ones, it's essential to remain humble and sensitive to the fact that not everyone has the same experience. When we make our families seem perfect, we risk alienating others who may be facing their own struggles, whether they involve health issues, financial troubles, or personal conflicts. Miss Elsie learned that in the end, it's not about celebrating a flawless family, but about embracing the imperfections that make us human. When she began to listen more attentively to her sister's struggles and stopped focusing solely on her own family's achievements, their relationship slowly mended. By acknowledging the difficulties that come with family life and expressing empathy, Miss Elsie was able to rebuild her bond with Violet, realizing that true family unity doesn't come from boasting about perfection. It comes from supporting each other through the ups and downs. Let me know if you'd like any further adjustments. 4. Showing off your social circle. At 77, George was the life of every gathering, and he loved to tell anyone who would listen about the vast number of friends he had accumulated over the years. From neighbors to old colleagues, George was quick to mention how he had an extensive social circle. "Oh, I have lunch with Bob every Tuesday, and Mary and I catch up at least once a week," he'd say, as if the sheer number of social connections was the ultimate indicator of his success. To George, his bustling calendar of social events was a testament to how well liked he was and how active his life had remained as he aged. He took great pride in the fact that he was always surrounded by people. However, over time, George began to notice that invitations to social gatherings started to slow down. He wasn't receiving as many phone calls or spontaneous invites for coffee as he used to, and his weekly lunches seemed to become more and more solitary. At first he brushed it off, thinking it was just a coincidence. But when he brought it up to his good friend Evelyn, she gently explained to him why things had changed. She pointed out that his constant bragging about how many people he knew made others feel like mere numbers in his life, not true friends. George's friends started to feel less valued, as if they were just one in a crowd, rather than individuals who held a special place in his heart. The truth was, George's focus on quantity over quality had started to alienate the very people he cherished. What he didn't realize was that the true value of friendships lies not in the number of people you know, but in the depth of the connections you share. Bragging about how many friends you have can come across as shallow and impersonal, leaving others feeling like they're just another name on a list, rather than a meaningful part of your life. It's the genuine, intimate conversations and moments of support that truly define a friendship, not the number of events or people involved. George came to understand that what truly matters in old age is the quality of the relationships you nurture. It's not about how many people you can fit into your social calendar, but about the deep, meaningful connections that provide you with a sense of belonging and love. Instead of boasting about his full schedule, George began to focus on the friendships that truly mattered. The ones where he could share his heart and offer support, not just a seat at the table. He realized that his friendships weren't a competition to see how many people could fit in, but a reflection of how much love and care he could give to each individual. In the end, George learned that it's not the size of your social circle that counts, but the richness of the relationships within it. By shifting his focus from boasting about his numerous friends to truly appreciating the bonds he shared with a few special people, George found that the invitations and connections he longed for began to return. He discovered that meaningful relationships built on mutual respect and care are the ones that stand the test of time, not the ones that simply fill up your calendar. 5. Highlighting your travel experiences. Margaret, 84, had lived a life filled with adventure, then favolic. In her younger years, she had traveled to exotic places all over the world, Africa, Europe, and even the remote islands of the South Pacific. Every time she got together with her friends, Margaret would eagerly share her latest travel stories. She'd regale them with tales of walking through the ancient ruins of Rome, sailing through the crystal-clear waters of the Caribbean, and dining in the bustling markets of Morocco. Her stories were filled with excitement and awe. But over time, she noticed that one friend, in particular, Clara, had begun to withdraw. At first, Margaret thought it was just a coincidence, but as the weeks went by, Clara started to decline invitations and seemed distant during their conversations. Margaret couldn't understand why Clara, who had always been such a lively and engaged friend, was now avoiding her. It wasn't until one afternoon, when they sat down for tea, that Clara finally spoke up. She gently explained how hearing about Margaret's constant travels made her feel inadequate. Clara had always dreamed of traveling, but could never afford to do so. Margaret's stories, though well-meaning, made Clara feel left out, and as though her life was somehow less exciting or fulfilling. This was a tough realization for Margaret. She had always been proud of her travels and wanted to share the joy and beauty of the world with her friends. But she came to understand that her stories, though filled with wonder, were unintentionally creating a divide. Travel for some is a privilege that not everyone can access. For Clara, hearing about Margaret's adventures was a reminder of the things she couldn't experience and the financial limitations that kept her grounded. Margaret realized that she had been using her travel experiences to one-up others rather than simply share her love for adventure. The lesson here is clear. Travel stories, like all personal experiences, should be shared with sensitivity and respect. It's important to recognize that not everyone has the means or opportunity to travel the way we do. Instead of focusing on the lavishness of our trips, we should aim to share the joy and wonder of travel in a way that brings people along on the journey, rather than making them feel left behind. The beauty of a place, the excitement of a new culture, and the lessons learned along the way are all valuable stories. But they should be shared in a spirit of inclusion, not comparison. Margaret learned from her conversation with Clara and began to change the way she shared her travel experiences. Instead of boasting about the exotic locations she had visited, she started talking about the lessons she learned and the people she met. She found that Clara and others in her circle were far more interested in the personal growth and insights she gained from her travels rather than the glamour of the destinations themselves. By shifting her focus, Margaret not only salvaged her friendship with Clara, but also deepened the connections with all her friends. She realized that the most valuable stories are the ones that uplift, inspire, and connect us, no matter where we've been. 7. Boasting about physical appearance or agelessness. Linda, at 70, was often praised for looking decades younger than her age. She received countless compliments about her smooth skin, youthful glow, and vibrant energy. Proud of how she had aged, Linda would frequently boast about how people mistook her for being in her 50s. "Can you believe they thought I was only 55? She'd laugh, often turning the conversation back to her appearance. Linda was delighted by the attention and loved being the center of admiration for her ageless beauty. She would often emphasize how well she had taken care of herself, attributing her youthful look to her diet, exercise routine, and skincare regimen. However, one afternoon, Linda noticed that her friend Sally, who was in the same age group, seemed uncomfortable whenever the topic of appearance came up. Sally had been struggling with the visible signs of aging, which included wrinkles, age spots, and a slower metabolism. She had always been self-conscious about her appearance, and hearing Linda constantly brag about how youthful she looked only made Sally feel worse about herself. Linda hadn't realized it, but her comments were inadvertently making Sally feel like she was falling behind in the aging process. Sally began to avoid conversations about appearance altogether, and Linda could sense the distance growing between them. It wasn't until a heart-to-heart conversation that Linda began to understand the impact her words had on Sally. Sally gently explained how, despite Linda's good intentions, constantly talking about her appearance made her feel inadequate. Sally admitted that aging had been hard on her, and the constant comparison to Linda's flawless skin only deepened her insecurities. Linda was shocked. She had never intended to make anyone feel bad about aging. After all, it was a topic she had always celebrated with her youthful spirit. But hearing Sally's perspective helped her realize that boasting about one's agelessness could unintentionally hurt others who were struggling with the natural process of growing older. The lesson Linda learned was simple but profound. Aging is a unique experience for everyone, and it's essential to embrace it gracefully without comparing ourselves to others. Boasting about one's physical appearance, especially in old age, can inadvertently make others feel insecure or inferior. We all age differently, and what might seem like a harmless brag can deepen feelings of self-doubt for those who are struggling with the changes in their bodies. Instead of focusing on how we look, we should celebrate the wisdom, experiences, and inner beauty that come with aging. After this conversation, Linda became more mindful of how she spoke about her appearance. Rather than boasting about her youthful looks, she started embracing the process of aging with humility and grace. Linda learned to appreciate her appearance for what it was, an expression of the many years she had lived, the experiences she had gained, and the wisdom she had accumulated. She also began to compliment others on qualities beyond their physical appearance, offering support and encouragement that uplifted, rather than inadvertently making anyone feel bad about the way they looked. By focusing on kindness and respect for the aging process, Linda strengthened her bond with Sally and with all those around her. 8. Talking too much about how much you know. Frank, at 79, was known for his vast knowledge. He had lived through many decades of change and had acquired a wealth of information over the years. Whether it was history, politics, literature, or practical life advice, Frank loved to share what he knew with anyone who would listen. At family gatherings, he would often dominate the conversation, recounting stories of the past and offering his opinions on virtually every topic. He felt proud of the knowledge he had accumulated and enjoyed being seen as the family's expert on just about everything. It was clear to everyone that Frank valued his intellect and took great pride in his ability to provide answers to any question. However, one day, his granddaughter Emma, who had been quietly sitting in the corner, seemed increasingly disengaged as Frank continued to speak. Frank had noticed that Emma had been struggling with her schoolwork lately. But he hadn't realized how much his constant boasting about his knowledge was affecting her. That afternoon, Emma walked away from the family gathering with her shoulders slumped and a look of frustration on her face. Later that evening, Frank overheard Emma talking to her mother, expressing how discouraged she felt. "I'll never be as smart as Grandpa," Emma said. He always knows everything, and it makes me feel like I'm just not good enough." Frank was taken aback. He had always meant to share his knowledge with his family out of love and a desire to teach, but he hadn't realized that his constant talking about how much he knew was making Emma feel inferior. She had been struggling with her schoolwork and feeling overwhelmed, but instead of receiving encouragement or guidance, she felt like her efforts were nothing compared to Frank's vast intellectual achievements. Frank's well-meaning intentions had backfired, and now he had unwittingly made Emma feel discouraged about her own abilities. The lesson here is important. While it's wonderful to share wisdom, it's essential to do so without diminishing others or making them feel inferior. Everyone has their own pace when it comes to learning, and bragging about how much you know can unintentionally make others feel inadequate. It's important to recognize that not everyone is in the same place in their journey, and sometimes the best way to share knowledge is through encouragement, support, and understanding, rather than through endless explanations of what you know. Frank realized that although his knowledge was valuable, it was important to approach sharing it with humility and sensitivity. Instead of bragging about how much he knew, he began to ask questions and listen more to his family's struggles and perspectives. Frank learned that sharing wisdom wasn't about showcasing his intelligence, but about offering guidance that empowered others, helping them to feel more capable, not less. He took the time to sit with Emma and offered her support in her schoolwork, explaining things in a way that made her feel more confident and capable. By shifting his approach, Frank deepened his relationships and created a space where everyone could feel respected and encouraged, regardless of their own knowledge or abilities. 9. Bragging about being independent while others depend on help. Nina, at 72, prided herself on her independence. She often boasted about how she could manage everything on her own, handling her housework, running errands, and even keeping up with her garden. To Nina, independence was a badge of honor she wore proudly. She would frequently mention to her friends and neighbors how she didn't rely on anyone for help, whether it was for physical tasks or emotional support. "I've always believed in doing things myself," she would say with a proud smile, "and I'm still going strong." Nina's words were often accompanied by stories of how she'd managed to keep her life running smoothly without asking for a single favor from anyone. She reveled in the idea of being self-sufficient, believing that it was a sign of strength. However, Nina's confident declarations began to take on a different tone one afternoon when she was talking to her neighbor Ruth, who was in her late 70s and had been relying on caregivers for some time. Ruth, who had been facing health challenges, listened quietly as Nina boasted about her self-sufficiency. Nina noticed that Ruth's expression changed as she continued to talk about how easy it was for her to get by without help. After their conversation, Ruth seemed distant, and Nina could sense that something was off. She didn't understand why Ruth, who was usually so warm and friendly, had been so quiet during their chat. Later that day, Nina ran into Ruth again, and this time Ruth opened up about how Nina's comments had made her feel. "I used to be independent too," Ruth said softly, "but now I have to rely on others for help, and it's not easy. It's hard when people don't understand that not everyone can manage on their own." Ruth explained how much pride she had once taken in her independence, but as her health declined, accepting help had become an inevitable reality. Nina was taken aback. She hadn't realized that her boasting had unintentionally made Ruth feel small, as if she wasn't capable or worthy just because she needed assistance. The lesson Nina learned was clear. There's value in both giving and receiving help, especially as we age. Boasting about independence can unintentionally alienate those who rely on others for support. Everyone's situation is different, and it's essential to recognize that needing help doesn't diminish a person's worth or strength. Nina realized that by constantly highlighting her own self-sufficiency, she was inadvertently making Ruth and others who required assistance feel less capable. Instead of boasting about her independence, Nina began to understand the importance of empathy and support for those in different circumstances. From that point on, Nina's attitude shifted. She learned to embrace the idea that accepting help gracefully, whether from family, friends, or caregivers, was just as valuable as being independent. Nina also made an effort to offer her help to Ruth, whether by simply spending time with her or offering small gestures of support. She recognized that, in old age, the ability to ask for and receive help is not a sign of weakness, but a reflection of the interconnectedness we share with others. By learning to appreciate both independence and the need for help, Nina strengthened her bond with Ruth and others in her community, cultivating a spirit of mutual respect and understanding. As we've seen today, boasting in old age can sometimes lead to unintended consequences, especially when it comes to things like independence, health, and family dynamics. The most valuable trait we can cultivate in our later years is empathy, humility, and understanding. Remember, the true beauty of aging lies in the connections we build, not the things we brag about. Thank you so much for watching. I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you agree with the lessons shared, comment 9 below. If you feel differently, drop a 0 in the comments, and let's keep the conversation going. See you in the next video. Stay wise and stay kind.